All right, I'm very honored to be joined by Dr. Rennie Moon. Dr. Moon, you come from Washington State, just like me. I mean, I don't know if that's where you're originally from, but we're expats. We're expats of Washington State for similar reasons, I guess. You're a pediatrician, and you are in this article. I actually I'm kind of hesitant to even call it an article because I kind of want to call it a hack job. But that's typically what the Daily Beast writes. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised by this, but it's inside the clinic where being a discredited doctor is a plus. And they're talking about this We the People clinic that you are now heading the pediatric portion of. Could we just first start with what is We the People clinic?
So I actually chuckle when I read this article because it's all propaganda. It's the We the People clinic is just a traditional pediatric clinic that we used to have even a few years ago. This was a typical, normal American pediatric clinic. And then the world just turned upside down, right? We just sort of fell apart. Our nation did in terms of freedom and our lack of freedom. So we're really just a typical clinic where parents can come. We want to see anyone who wants our care and who wants to have a true informed consent discussion with a physician who isn't bought by the insurance companies or by their employers and isn't being told what they have to say to someone. So someone who will give you a true informed consent discussion about your child and what next steps you might consider with whatever their medical condition is. Yeah.
The subheadline is you can't work here unless you've been fired by the establishment for believing in your patients first. And I think they probably put that in there as a sort of a virtue signal to their reader demographic, which is like, oh no, not another group of these crazy people who, are misinformation spreaders or whatever in the name of truth and justice. Not another one of those.
Yeah, everything is just swirling with the misinformation and the propaganda right now, right? So this is a clinic where, I've happened to have lost jobs over the fact that I spoke in defense of people and parents and their parental rights, and in defense of informed consent discussions with patients, and in defense of my Hippocratic oath to do no harm. So I really was just doing my job, and I spoke. And I was fired over that, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm actually proud that I was fired because we need to take a stand for freedom in America right now when we've lost so much freedom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for taking over while I froze, by the way. I could tell.
Yeah. That's okay.
I have my, it's a long story what's going on. My kids are not taking their naps. Anyway, it must be the full moon and Halloween or whatever, but the signal is one of the least of my worries. My audience is used to it, so you guys just stay in there, Doctor.
Kids need more sugar probably, right?
Yeah, right. Dr. Moon, she's on the case. She can take over the show at any point. All right. So however, what I was trying to say is that, they put that in there, I think, as almost that for their viewers, that's kind of like saying right-wing extremist or something. It's like this buzzword to then discredit everything that's about to come. And I'm curious though, because for the people like my audience, they would read that and they'd say, that's awesome. So I wonder if there's just this complete disconnect between people like this author, who I don't know, Decca Meldowney.
Yeah.
Like, does she just not know that there are so many smart, researched people who think that that's a really good thing, not just a bunch of complete anti-science morons? I mean, what's your thought on that divide? On just like the way that people like you have been covered? Is it intentional or is it just ignorance?
I have no idea. I actually just think it's extremely laughable at this point. It's just so ridiculous. So to give you my background, I've spent my whole career as an advocate of traditional childhood vaccines. I'm certainly not someone who has ever been anti-vax, if you want to use that term. I trained at a top U.S. medical school. I have had no actions against any state medical license. I've had no lawsuits against me. Despite having a medical license in Washington State for close to 20 years, And I cared for our region's sickest children in the hospital setting. I was a hospital physician. And all I did was just simply say, wait a minute, we shouldn't be forcing people to take something that's experimental and that has problems. And we also shouldn't be censored and silenced and kept from having a discussion with our colleagues and our peers about the path moving forward in terms of giving this product to our nation's kids. So I simply asked some questions, and everything rained down, and all of a sudden I am listed as being a discredited physician, which really should concern everybody, because that is so laughable and so far from the real truth that medicine and science are all based on our ability to have a scientific discussion with our colleagues and with our families and really kind of figure out what the right answer is. We had a pandemic that hit our nation, right? That clearly did not have any standard of care attached to how to care for someone with this virus. There was no known standard of care. It was a very fluid situation. And yet we had marching orders that were coming to us from above, from people that weren't even out in the field taking care of patients, out in the clinics taking care of patients. And they told us we couldn't talk and we couldn't debate and we couldn't have scientific discourse and we couldn't speak any longer. So we're in this crazy situation that really reminds me of that Twilight Show movie that I used to not like when I was a kid because it scared me. And so here we are, right?
Question about the clinic specifically, because I think a lot of people are really interested in what its goal is. They say the blueprint for an alternative healthcare system, one without the influence of insurance companies and third-party interference, and patients direct their own care. What exactly does that mean? And actually, Dr. Moon, too, I'm sorry, because my daughter, she woke up. Well, she wasn't really sleeping anyway. She woke up, came down. You're a pediatrician, you know how it is.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear for like 10 seconds. Did you tell people that Washington State University, you were a professor there, and they did not renew your contract over?
No, we haven't gotten into that yet.
We haven't gotten into that.
I lost one job over the mandate. I said over the COVID-19 mandate, I just said, there's no way. My family actually fled from communism. They fled from a situation where they had to show their papers to people. And I said, there's just no way their daughter is being asked to do this, where I have to show my own healthcare papers to an employer to retain my employment when I'm perfectly healthy. And we knew that this didn't stop transmission and it didn't stop infection at that point. So no employer has the right to mandate to anybody what their individual healthcare decision should be. And so I just said no to the mandate. I was terminated over that, again, with a completely clean record of patient care. And I actually had a fully booked clinic. I was booked for 4 weeks out, but I just disappeared from the clinic because they put me on unpaid administrative leave and made me leave during the middle of a pandemic. So, and then the medical school was upset because I traveled on my personal time off at the request of a U.S. senator. I traveled to Washington, D.C., and I just spoke as a concerned pediatrician. I spoke to us at a Senate hearing as an individual concerned pediatrician, not representing the school in any way. I said, I'm concerned about the problems with this vaccine for our nation's children. And I just want to express that to people who are actually making policy and who are, I just want to express those views. It's not just my right to express those views, but it's actually my obligation to express those views because I'm someone who, like every other physician out there right now, has been asked to administer this product to our nation's children. And so I have the right and the obligation to ask those questions. Well, the medical school cited my appearance at the Senate hearing as something that they were very upset about in a memo. And then they did not renew my annual faculty contract a few months later, so thus terminating my employment. So I lost my job at the medical school. And I worry about what that message is that it sends to our future doctors and to future medical students. To me, the message is, don't question anything. Don't ever question what problems there might be with a product. Don't say anything, because if you do, you'll lose your whole career. And that we just can't let that continue. So this clinic is something that I think is admirable. This is a clinic that that has physicians employed like myself, and I'm actually not employed at the clinic. I'm actually volunteering at this point at the clinic, so I'm working there for free. But this is a clinic where we are able to sit down and have a true conversation with our patients without an insurance company and without an employer or without anyone else breathing down our necks. Of course, I'm seeing patients the way I've always seen patients. I'm providing them with traditional advice and with the care that I've learned over my many years in practice in pediatrics. I came from a top training institution, and I'm using that training and that experience to share my knowledge with my patients and to help them as they figure out what to do with their children's health concerns. So I'm not really doing anything differently than what I've done my entire career. But what is different is I don't have an employer telling me what I can and cannot say, because that's what's changed in the last few years. Our employers are now specifically telling physicians what they can and cannot say to patients. And that is truly terrifying. You should not have a physician that can't speak to you truthfully about what their expertise tells them about your child's condition, right?
Yeah, my neighbor actually was just telling me about her niece who couldn't go to her first year of college because her doctor actually did tell her, hey, you have a certain, I don't know if it was a blood type or there was something that made her extra at risk for that, and was like, but the doctor said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but that's ridiculous that a doctor would say, I'm not supposed to tell you this.
Yeah. And so I realized that people living in other states may not have seen the same, honestly, tyranny that I've seen. But I came from, again, like you, I lived in Washington State, which is a West Coast state that is somehow in the leading forefront of this tyrannical change in healthcare, where we went from being someone who provided advice to patients and recommendations and had logical and thoughtful discussions with patients. All of a sudden, it turned into this system where, you will do as your doctor says or else. And the or else has turned rather frightening and scary. So I've had many phone calls with people contacting our group of pediatricians. And, we're hearing things like, I was fired from my pediatric office because I asked too many questions. Seriously? People are being fired from their pediatric offices for asking questions. As a parent, of course you should ask questions. That was always present in our practices. I welcomed the parents who asked questions. But that is no longer acceptable in some of these states. So I fully realize that if you live in a state where you haven't seen this descend down around you, this cage of tyranny descend down around you, you may not understand what we're talking about. But what I've seen in Washington truly frightens me for what the future of healthcare will look like if we continue to go down this path where, for example, one lady called me recently, and she actually had her medical decision-making rights terminated in a custody dispute with her husband because the clinic had fired her for asking too many questions about her child's health. That was all. She wasn't accused of yelling or being threatening or doing anything like that, which obviously, no one should tolerate someone yelling. But she simply had asked questions, and the clinic didn't like it, so they terminated her. I've had other patients coming in who have been fired from the clinic, for example, for not giving a hepatitis B shot to a newborn infant whose mother didn't have hepatitis B. So this baby has no risk of hepatitis B until they are sexually active and much older, right? So you get it from your mom, or you get it, in the birthing process, or you get it later when you're sexually active. So to be fired from the clinic is outrageous. Parents have to have the right to make decisions for their own children. That's the way it's always been. This is not something that we can continue to tolerate. So this clinic is really just an old-fashioned, the way it was even 5 years ago, pediatric clinic. So I laugh when they make us out to sound like we're some sort of whatever they make us sound like we are. It's a propaganda hit piece, that article, but it makes me chuckle because it's just so outlandish. It really is,
just to show people, if you want to check out We the People Health and Wellness Center, it is WTPhealthcare.com. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how it works in a second. Dr. Moon, just 1 second. I have to tell people about my wine. If I freeze, you got to tell people about my wine, okay? So just do your best, bitch.
I could use a bottle.
Yeah, I'll give you one. It is, well, I mean, it is my sponsor, but I have to say I do love it. It's a high altitude. I call it extremist altitude, since everybody I have on is an extremist of some kind, is labeled by the media. Then you can be an extremist and not lose your job or go to federal prison and just have a glass of wine instead. So go do your, once we're almost 9,000 feet, everything's from 6,000 feet plus. Far fewer pesticides, hand-picked grapes, small family farms, vineyards that have been around for 200 years. Natural fermentation. It's just great wine. It's a great way to support my work. They've been with me from the beginning. So support Bonner Wine, because it's one of those companies that's never told me what to say or who I can talk to. And they do a significant part to keep me in business. So AllisonWinePromo.com, you get 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. You can also go to greenpasture.org. They make the fermented cod liver oil, butter oil blend that I take. Yes? Okay, hang on 1 second. I have a child in there. Lily, I'm trying to make us grocery money right now. Okay, hang on. If you use the if you use the promo code Allison10, which should come up in a second. Okay, you know what? Let me just tell everybody about Green Pasture, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Moon a question, and then I'll help you out with that. Greenpasture.org. Here we go. Promo code Allison10. Okay. They probably randomly gave me the 10, but I'm just going to say it's 10 stars out of 10 stars. That's why it's Allison10. So use the promo code Allison10 at greenpasture.org. They've got a bunch of other products too, but it's all high vitamin D. Started taking it, never got a cavity again. So thanks to them. They took me to the White Surgeons Conference. Well, they put me up in a hotel and everything. So thanks to Green Pasture for doing that. Really appreciate it. And then finally, if you go to AllisonMorrow.locals.com, you can support my work and be on my editorial board. Go one-on-one with some of the most censored people on the internet, like Dr. Moon. We have questions coming up for her. The question I want to ask you, though, while I'm take care of Lily for a second, she's got a question for me. So yeah, but could you tell people a little bit about your background and communism and the stuff that you were telling me before we went live, and why this all concerns you on a higher level, I think, that some other people don't understand?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So my family background is actually kind of interesting. So my dad was born in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and my mom was born in Prague, which was former Czechoslovakia. So, and they eventually met in Czechoslovakia in Prague. Actually, I think just outside of Prague, but so Prague at that time was communist. And I think that as a nation, we've really forgotten how terrible communism has been in the history of our world, right? So many people that have fled from communism, and my parents were no different. They fled from a system that wouldn't let them travel from even one village to another without police permission. And again, this was before computers, right? So they were able to track people. They had to show their papers to travel from one place to another. They were assigned work. It wasn't of their choosing. And they really were not allowed to critically think or to speak or to live as free people. Their lives were in danger. My mom remembers and has spoken about how she was at work one day and she went to sit next to a gentleman who was sitting alone. And he told her, "Oh, honey, you can't sit near me. I'm being ostracized because I spoke things that I wasn't allowed to speak. And I'm about to be sent to a hard labor camp." I think he was actually being sent, if I understood her correctly, he was being sent to a uranium mine, which is radioactive. And I don't think he would be very likely to survive that. You know, so many millions of people in the history of the world have fled from communist regimes because their lives were really literally a living hell. So my parents fled and they were able to escape to Austria, which was a free country. And then they applied for citizenship, actually to 3 different countries. They applied to Canada and to America and to Australia. And in those days, you applied just like you would apply to college or to some program. They had to turn in applications. They had to show that they would be people who would take advantage of the American dream in the sense of working hard and embracing American values of freedom and hard work, and you can get to wherever you want to be. And so they ultimately were accepted to all three countries. And my dad wanted to be a cowboy, so off to the western part of the US they went. And I was born here in America. So I grew up in a family where we went back to visit my relatives under communism, and I saw how they lived. And that's where the joking, I guess, kind of goes away here, because it wasn't the least bit funny. I was 11 when we crossed over into what they called the Iron Curtain. So it was a barbed wire electric fence with watchtowers and guards with guns and submachine guns and dogs. And we crossed that in a train. So they were living in a prison. Their country had literally become a prison, and they couldn't just leave and travel when they wanted to. They had extreme shortages of food. Money was scarce. They didn't have the freedom to speak with one another. You had to be very careful with what you said, because if you said something, that the government didn't agree with or didn't like, you would be thrown into jail. And so, all laughing aside, right now we're seeing that same type of censorship here in America. You can't get on the internet, you can't get onto social media without being censored and silenced. And so we're in the early stages of this, except for they haven't yet come to our front doors to throw us into jail. But that's the next step on this pathway to what amounts to a living hell. So we are still in a state where we can turn this around. People need to wake up to how serious this is and realize that ultimately this is not anything that anyone does well with. In fact, millions upon millions of people, looking back at history, have died under communist regimes because they don't tolerate people speaking out. And so, so I didn't start to speak out because I wasn't, this is scary for everybody. Everyone's scared that they're going to lose their job. I just looked at it from the perspective of, wow, we have morphed into a really crazy situation. And the only way out of it right now, the only way out of it is for all of us to speak out and to make this stop and say, it's not okay to silence people. It's not okay to stop them from speaking. It's not okay for this system to descend down on us, because if I think of it as like being in a big pool of concrete, right? Like it's kind of liquidy at first, and we can still move and we can still swim and we can still move around that. But once it hardens around us, we won't be able to move. And so we've seen in other countries where they've turned, without any sort of court hearing, they've taken away people's money using the digitalization of money. They've had control over the banks, and there's now a term in America called debanking. Like, what's that? I mean, this is all ridiculously scary, but it's basically where they take your own hard-earned money away from you without any court hearing because they don't like what you said.
Yeah.
So we're morphing into a really scary time. I think many Americans are waking up to how bad this is. Yeah.
What do you think about the United States Constitution? Do you ever say to yourself, like I hear from people, well, that violates the Constitution, so that couldn't happen, versus like countries you're talking about didn't have a Constitution? I mean, I happen to believe, after interviewing people like you over and over for the last 2 years, that the Constitution is only as strong as the court system which upholds it. And our court system sucks right now. So I don't really know what the Constitution does for us if a bunch of judges violate it constantly. So I don't know. I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that protect us at all? Or is it just a weak piece of paper at this point?
My mother's homeland had a constitution.
Oh,
and
wow.
they were a very civilized country. And they were well educated. They were well spoken. And my mother tells me very clearly that they were warned by the Russians, actually, that were fleeing from communism in Russia. They were warned that the system was descending into the Czechoslovakia. And everyone said, no, it could never happen here. We're civilized. We have a constitution. We have rights. And it did. It happened. And it happens because people sit quietly and they don't speak out and they take part in the system. The system is, I don't think I understand fully. I don't think any of us do how this continues to happen, but it's obviously something that mankind can morph into given the right circumstances, because it's happened over and over again in history. And I think what happens is people get to be fearful and they don't want to speak out. So they continue to work and they continue to say, you know what, this could never happen here. Or they'll say, oh, it's happening here, but what can I do? It's just me. But by continuing to do the job that they're doing in that system and by not speaking out, they're continuing to let that cement harden around everybody to the point that eventually everyone is trapped by it. So, and then people think, oh, well, I'm going to escape this. I'm going to be one of the elite ones who's going to escape this, and I'll be the king of the hill will be me, right? But that doesn't happen either, because this system eats everybody. It destroys everybody. So right now, we have to be speaking out, and we have to make this get better and go away. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have these short-sighted perspectives that it's just going to be this one-time thing, that it's not greasing the wheels for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so we're just short-sighted at the precedent. When my bosses at the Department of Natural Resources told me that I had to stop interviewing doctors like you, I realized that, like, yeah, I could do that. But what I was basically saying, if I agreed to it, is that you can tell me what I can say or who I can associate with publicly in my free time. You as the government can tell me who I can associate with and what they're allowed to say in public to me as the government. And what's the next thing? Like, okay, say I just decided I'm never going to interview a doctor. What's the next thing? I can't, because now I've told them that they can push me around like that. There's going to be something else. And so then I was like, well, is that what I want to do for the rest of my life? Like just wait for the next thing that they don't like and they're going to tell me I can't talk about. And then I just, even if it was a one-time thing, I would have still told them to pound sand. But that definitely made me realize that, like, we're opening a door here for something, the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's not just a one-time thing.
We're not just opening a door. We're literally right now sliding off a cliff on our butts. I mean, we're going down. And
we're welcoming it. It's almost like we're inviting it in for dinner.
And and so when you look at these articles like the one that you showed, they're laughable pieces of propaganda. Their propaganda really is just misinformation that is designed to mislead the American public and to make them think that the people they're writing about are somehow villains in some way. Again, it's laughable. Look, my whole track record is nothing but clean. I just dared ask about the safety problems with a product. I was doing my job, and look what's happened. I mean, it's really frightening, because we have to have the ability to question. We have to have the ability to speak. So there are many, many, many physicians that have been speaking out. It's not just lone wolf me. There are many of us, and we're experienced clinicians who know what we're seeing right in front of our eyes. This is not something that we made up. This is what we're seeing out in our communities, and we know what the normal is because we've taken care of our community's children or our community's adults for our whole career. We know what normal is, and so we know when we start to hear things that are just not right, and we're well past that just not right stage, to the point of knowing that there are problems with this, and yet our colleagues will not even entertain just a collegial discussion. I think there needs to be a public discussion between physicians groups at this point, rather than one group of physicians silencing another group of physicians. That has never ended well in history. Silencing a group of people has never ended well in history.
Yeah. It's just, I think, like you said, if the media doesn't call you discredited or use the word misinformation or whatever, then they have to explain really why somebody who's been a practicing doctor for so long has just overnight turned into some kind of delusion psychopath. I mean, that's basically what they're saying about you. Is it just
And there's so many of us. I can guarantee you, I did not sit in a library, because in those days we sat in libraries and study my tush off for years, so I could just throw my entire career away one day. I'm speaking out because I took an oath. I took an oath to do no harm, and it's my obligation to speak out. And so that's exactly right. And there's so many of us speaking out, and the answer from the other side of this has been silence them all, take away their licenses, take away their credentials. What will they do next? Would they throw us into jail for speaking? I mean, I at this point don't know. None of us know. That's, if you look at history, that's where history takes you. And
to that point, I don't know about doctors, but one of our major concerns in Washington State was that they will do that to parents
Yeah,
because they've now passed this new law about gender affirming care is
correct.
abuse. So now that they've escalated what it means to abuse your kid, to not immediately take them for gender affirming care, we were like, I mean, they just opened the door to call anything abuse at this point. And yeah, I do believe they'll take your kid away from you in Washington State. I don't know about, put you in jail. Oh, thank you. Okay, let's move to the questions real fast, Doc. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
will say that as a physician who practiced in Washington State for so many years, yeah, those laws coming down the pipeline are terrifying. You as a parent should not lose your parental rights because of the decision that you make in raising your children. I've taken care of plenty of children who have been physically abused in Washington State. I saw many of those children come through my hospital. Kids with skull fractures, kids with broken bones. Physical abuse is a real and terrible thing, but this has morphed into, calling parents who love their children and are taking good care of their children and simply don't want to buy into the surgeries that are being proposed and are being performed on really young children. This has become outrageous, and the people need to speak out because we just can't tolerate this. So in my practice in Washington, I had parents of children as young as 3 and 4 years of age, coming in, and they were gender transitioning their children.
Wow.
So this has reached a new type of absolute, I'm going to call it what it is, lunacy, and that is the child abuse. I'm sorry, but a parent telling a beautiful, healthy, 3-year-old girl that she's a boy, or a 3-year-old boy that she's a girl, and putting them down this path of being on hormones and having permanent and irreversible surgeries performed on them as they get older, that is the child abuse. This has got to stop. And we need to have discussions with people and figure this out. There is not one of us out there who would not support the true child who truly is transgender. I think we all would agree as Americans it's the right thing to do. If you have a child who truly identifies as transgender, then we should be supportive of that child. No one is saying to be cruel to that child. But what I was seeing in Washington was a steady influx of kids coming in, one after another, that were gender questioning. And it has reached the point where it has turned into some sort of a Twilight Zone-like trend. And you ask these children, these teenagers, why they want to transition, and many of them very clearly tell you, all of my friends are doing this. I want to fit in. And we cannot be doing permanent surgeries and permanent harm to these children when they're still minors and they don't have the ability to make true informed consent discussions for their decisions for their own bodies. So yeah, and to take away parental rights for this is something that is just outrageous. So we have lost many parental rights in Washington, and I'm afraid more will be lost if people don't speak out. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cut the YouTube stream, everybody, so we can answer some questions over at AllisonMauro.locals.com. I appreciate everybody who's watching on YouTube. You know the drill. It's not because we're trying to evade censorship. We just like it better on the other platform. So thanks for the support, and we will see you